have faith in God is not a stagnant state. It's a journey. As a believer, we should grow in our knowledge of God and His Word. Walk with Alan Cutting and many other believers as together we walk the believer's journey.
Aloha and welcome to the Believer's Journey. It's so good to have you back again, and I'm so glad to be here. It's been interesting in our world. We're having storms and rain and thunder and lightning, and it's been good. And so, but I want to also say, I want to thank my sponsors for supporting our ministry, and it's just good to be here today. I love everybody. I'm glad you're coming, and I'm glad you're writing comments and asking questions, because that's what our ministry is all about, is to really try to get the word out and help people in accuracy, help people in the truth. And anyway, today my guest is Stephen Oliver. Stephen and I have known each other, I don't even know when we met, back in the mid-2000s or early 2000s. I was part of a group called the Christian Business Chamber of Commerce. I was one of the founders of it. And one year, Stephen came on board as a board member, and then eventually became the president of the chamber. So, hello, Stephen.
Hello, thank you, Alan. Appreciate it. And that's right. It was a blessing. You and your wife, Susan, were two individuals that welcomed me so much into the chamber in the beginning and encouraged me to get more involved. So thank you for that.
Well, we needed a treasurer real badly.
Absolutely. I remember that very clearly. Things moved pretty quickly too.
So anyway, Stephen, he's a CPA, and he's got two beautiful daughters.
Thank you.
And a wonderful wife. I mean, she's just a blessing and a half. I don't know how you snatched her.
Well, I think she snatched me. I'm blessed. Thank you.
But now I know you've worked for a friend of ours, Scott, and
yes.
Basically tell us about your work, because I know you integrate it with ministry as well.
I do. Thank you, Alan. Yes, as Alan said, I've been trained as a CPA. I've been certified with that designation for almost 30 years. Graduate of the great University of Texas at Austin. Did my graduate work at Our Lady Lake University, and over the past 30 plus years of my career, I've had the privilege to work for many different individuals, different organizations, and for myself. And as I've grown, my passion is Jesus. And so as I've grown through my journey in life, God's given me lots of opportunities to integrate my passion for Him with the work He's called me to do to the marketplace. So as a CPA, the kind of work I do is a little bit different than what you would associate with a CPA. Most CPAs do tax work or audit work for organizations. I get to do advisory type work or consulting work, primarily in guiding companies from a place where they're ready to grow to the next level, all the way through a transaction to exit. So I work with all various levels of business owners from a business size perspective, types of businesses, and helping them through that I would call it the back end of their business journey in their lives.
Now, your present company is Gethsemane.
Yes. Gethsemane Partners. I founded Gethsemane Partners in 2009. It's really a combination of a business and ministry. Mm-hmm. The whole idea is, as I described, and I chose Gethsemane. Many times I get asked this question: why Gethsemane? After I help folks understand how to pronounce Gethsemane, it's because it really ties to who I am and my name. Gethsemane is the garden of olive trees, and it means olive press, and that garden still exists today in Israel, in Jerusalem. And my last name being Oliver, I wanted to find a way to integrate my passion with my work. And oftentimes when I get involved with the work, I have to get into the details. We massage things, we dissect things. I also have a fraud background and a valuation background too. So when you bring all that together, the name just really fit.
Now, you also have been pretty active in teaching or been a leader in your church.
Yes, I've been a long-term member at Community Bible Church, or it's known here in the San Antonio community as CBC. became a member about 15 years ago. As Alan mentioned earlier, the Christian Business Chamber was a ministry that became a nonprofit out of Community Bible Church, and that's where he and I met. And in addition, I'm a percussionist, so I had a wonderful experience singing and playing with his bride, Susan, with our worship team there for many years. And then over the last 4 or 5 years, I've gotten more into teaching through our church and lead a Bible study of taking my class through the life of Christ. Now we're taking a pretty deep dive into discipleship, and then we hope to apply what we learn through the story of Acts here over the next year.
Yeah. Well, I know that I met your wife. She worked for a newspaper here, a little Christian newspaper called The Beacon.
She did. Yes, in fact, we both did. Roseanne worked with a wonderful young man, Keith Leslie, who founded The Beacon through his organization. Today, Duke Jonitz and his business partner have continued that legacy that Keith started. And Duke and Claude have done a great job on increasing that reach. But Roseanne, my wife, helped in marketing and sales back for a short period of time, and I actually got to have the opportunity to write some articles for The Beacon talking about business owners who share their faith in the marketplace. It was really a neat experience.
So, with Gethsemane Partners, do you do any particular work or business, let's say for nonprofits or churches and so forth?
Oftentimes, I get asked, questions about how to maintain my books or the accounting aspects of things. So certainly, I do get involved in that. In fact, I've performed, as you mentioned earlier, not only the treasurer role with the Christian Business Chamber, but I've also had that role with a couple other organizations, nonprofits, over the course of my career, and presently am getting involved in doing that role again for the Reagan High School Choir.
Oh, wow!
So I enjoy giving. I enjoy sharing. For me, one of the blessings of what God's called me to do is team with people, guide people, share knowledge, and because that's how we all grow. People took me under their wing when I was younger and shared their knowledge with me. That gave me the start to my career. I feel that's as a leader and a business owner and as a believer in Christ, that's what we're called to do.
Well, one of the things that I really admired about you is that when I was with the Christian Business Chamber, you were really concerned about the chamber keeping the integrity of ministry, because there was a time there just before you got there that we had a couple people trying to move it toward a business and networking for business, working as a business like in another chamber, but we were really a ministry. And you came on, I remember you asked me questions, then you wrote your little thing about the rules, or not rules, but it was values of how the chamber should be. And I think I just really admire you for that.
Well, I appreciate that. Sometimes people get involved, and diversity is great. Sharing ideas is great, but we always got to remember what an organization is called to do, or what its initial mission or vision is. Mm-hmm. And so, fortunately, Alan, as you said, and I appreciate you saying that, I had the privilege to talk with some other founding fathers of our chamber too, and it helped me to, with some of the other folks in our chamber, to put together a set of values that was pretty well received, I felt at the time, and helped us gently, without offending anybody, bring us back to a place where we could find strike the right balance between the vision of the chamber and some of the needs of its members, and wanting to utilize the chamber as a mechanism to do business.
Something you said, I think, is important for our audience to understand. And this is what it is. I mean, I have a lady that we lives with us. Her name is Naomi.
Yes.
And she's a bookkeeper. And I know that if there's a church or somebody in need, a ministry of need, she's totally willing to volunteer her time to help them with bookkeeping. Or even if they want to pay, she takes very little. I have a friend of mine who does that. Of course, he's getting too old. He has a bad back.
Bless his heart.
And he goes out and helps people with, he does home improvement.
Yes, absolutely.
And if there are people that can't afford to pay him, he says, well, make me a cake or fix me a dinner, and we're good.
Yes.
And but there are people out there that I believe really understand the idea of giving. So when you mentioned you like to give, I think that's so important, because a lot of times we get in our businesses that we work, or our jobs, or whatever it might be, we clock in, we clock out, and we're done, and all of a sudden it's like, let's eat, watch TV, eat popcorn, go to bed.
Right.
You know, and it's like, you know, we lose the aspect of our giving.
Right.
And we think that if we go to church and pay a tithe, we've given. And it's like, no, there's people out there that need people like us, that what we do, you know, we go out and we help them.
Absolutely. And, you know, that's a great point. That speaks, I believe, to the heart of who our Lord and Savior is. You know, his mission, summed up in the Gospels, is that he came to serve, not to be served, and to sacrifice himself. Now, obviously, we recognize the ultimate sacrifice that he paid for us, but if you really study his ministry and his work and what the disciples did, they picked up on it, and how they're led by the Holy Spirit. It's the little things. You know, I always go back to the Lord's first miracle. I can imagine he was having a great time, and the wine ran out. What are we going to do? And Mom put him on the spot, and while he wasn't ready to do what she was asked, he honored her and honored that request. And I think to your point, and what you described with Naomi, and I do the same thing. We recognize, I think, as you walk close, you know, walk more with Jesus, that there is no accidents in your path. And when people come to you, it's actually a privilege, and they ask for help, or they ask and want to share a need. So I do my best to try to do that to the best I can.
I mean, and I'm the same way. And I have a real funny thing about ministry. I lived with a pastor. His name was Lon Ekdahl. He'll be on our show at the end of June, by the way. I'm flying him out from Oregon, and he'll be here. It'll be an amazing show. Anyway, I learned about ministry from him, and I learned about what is important about it. And unfortunately, what you see in a lot of ministry is the big dollar. Making the money, you know, and it's whether it be in books or speeches and writings or whatever it might be. And I know for myself, it breaks my heart to see some of this. It's all money oriented. I know, like for myself, for example, if anybody who's watching wants to have me come speak, and teach a seminar, all I require basically is a love offering. Now, if you want to just pay me enough to get there and back, that's good. That's all I care about, because it's not about me. It's about Jesus.
Well, you know, it's interesting you would say that, and I think that's again, you mentioned something earlier about, you know, churches, ministries are also organizations that have needs and have to function in this world that we live in. So certainly how we view money is a big part of that. How we use money is a big part of that. And so I think it's, you know, faith. You know, I always go back to what Jesus taught us in the Sermon on the Mount, to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. And that then he reminded us as children of God that, listen, you know, I take care of all creation, and you're the apple of my eye. So you just got to take those steps of faith, and you look. I think you find over time what works for you, and then if God calls you to ministry, then you grow in that regards. And certainly some have platforms and personalities and ability, and they share that through books and whatnot. But I think, you know, I admire someone I admire in our local community, in the faith community, and I think he really does a great job in stewarding his talents in that area, is Max Lucado. And I've watched him over the years, was a member of his church for a while, and I don't know how he uses his resources financially and whatnot, but when I see what he does with his time and his talent, I certainly have to believe he's stewarding his treasure biblically and well too.
And even like Rick Warren, I mean, he's now known to give 90% of anything he makes back to the church.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I think that it's important we recognize those things. It's about giving of yourself. Jesus gave us a new commandment there in the upper room, that we love one another as he loved us.
Yes.
And that the world will know that we're his by the way we love one another. And unfortunately, what most people think about, oh yeah, how did Jesus love us? He went to the cross and died. No, he hadn't gone yet.
Absolutely. That's a great point.
He had spent time praying. He had spent time talking and feeding and healing, and
Yes.
he washed their feet. He spent time serving.
Yes, he did.
And that's what it's all about. So when you mentioned Jesus doing this, he was a perfect example.
Absolutely.
And his words were there for us to learn how to give back to one another.
And what's amazing and incredible is those words that he shared are available to us by the same Spirit that guided him, guides us. And so that's where, as I was in our the other day in our class that I teach, one of our co-leaders, we talked about the Bible and the hand concept of studying the Word, reading the Word, but memorizing and meditating on the Word. And when you do that, when you take the Word and you hide it in your heart, and then you allow the Spirit to bring it to your mind, that's when it can make a big difference. And it's incredible to watch. You know, share the Word in your way. Share the Word through your mind. Share the Word through your personality. The Spirit will take care of the rest.
Yes, yes. Well, it's great. I'm really glad you're here.
Thank you.
Me
too.
I called you on purpose because I think I've told you before, when I found out you actually participate in a couple of the feasts, right?
Yes, we do. Yes.
And I think we were in a parking lot, I think, a few years ago, and I think I mentioned to you I wanted to do that. And
Yes.
I still, not to this day, have started to do it. I think if I get so wrapped up with stuff, I just let it go. But, you know, I believe, like Paul said in Romans, that we are grafted in to the vine.
Yes.
And I think that when we look at Judaism in its purest form, and I don't mean Judaism as today, and I don't mean Judaism as in Jesus' day, I mean years before that.
Right.
When God laid it all out, when he basically has it there, that we're grafted into him. And by doing that, we have all this historical, cultural stuff that God has done for his people that we're now a part of. And I don't understand why the Christian church doesn't take part of this.
That's a complicated set of circumstances, I think, at the end of the day. And I'll go back to the idea of how God revealed himself. You know, he revealed himself to a people, to two people, in fact, Adam and Eve, and then ultimately through others over time. But all of our faiths, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all traces our roots back to an incredible couple, Abraham and Sarah. And it's there where the covenants began, became more clear. But over time, and especially after the life of Christ in the first century, there was a lot of struggle. Who is this Jesus person? Is he Torah or is he not? Is he the Son of God or is he not? And I think that struggle, there was a lot of, and if you dig deeper into the book of Acts, I think it explains a little bit where, Jesus came to fulfill the law and reveal truth, but then the idea of how he, if you're a follower of Christ, are you still upholding the traditional Judaism? And I think that struggle ultimately created a bifurcation between Christianity and Judaism that took place over several hundred years, and I won't not be a history buff, but certainly has continued on to today to a great extent.
As I am a history buff.
Yes, please.
So actually, and what really happened historically is that, when Jesus was a good Jew. I mean, he went to temple, he went to synagogue. He was a good Jew.
Yes.
I mean, he participated in a feast.
He did.
And so all this. However, after he rose from the dead, and then we have Pentecost, where Peter came out and preached.
Right.
There were 5,000, most likely men we're talking about,
right,
that came to Jesus and made him the Lord of their life.
Yes.
Well, we're talking about Jews that came to him.
Primarily
we're not talking about
point.
Gentiles.
Right. That's the way we understand it. Mm-hmm.
And so what happened was you have a massive amount of Jews now following Jesus. So in the beginning, you had these 5, I call denominations, Pharisees, Sadducees, Hellenists, Zionists, and so forth.
Yes.
And what happens after Pentecost, you have a 6th one.
Interesting way to look at it.
And it wasn't really called Christianity at the
wasn't.
time.
We were
okay. Mm-hmm. So basically, but it grew, and it grew with a lot of Jews, and then it grew into, as Paul came on the scene.
Yes.
Okay, then it grew into the his Gentile world.
Absolutely.
Into the Roman
Right.
area.
Right.
So what you have is this mixture. Well, the
Yes.
problem is that the Jews would follow to these churches, and Paul calls them Judaizers.
Yes.
Because they're wanting the Gentiles to participate in the law
Right.
of say, circumcision.
Yes.
And Paul is saying they don't have to, and so there's the problem. There's your rift.
There's your rift.
So
Right.
after the Jews, I guess it was AD 79 when the temple got destroyed and
yes.
so forth. Or no, I was AD 70. I'm sorry, mixing something up. Then what happens is, after a while, the Judaizer says, we're not going to do this anymore because you guys aren't going to comply with this law.
Right.
So we walk away. So what happened was, this Jewish following, now the Jews walk away and it becomes a Gentile following.
That makes, yes.
And that really is what happened. So what we know as Christianity today really started as Judaism, as a sect or
Yes.
denomination of
Yes.
Judaism.
Yes.
Because that's what they had back then.
Exactly.
It wasn't these were not political parties.
No, they weren't.
Okay, these were actual denominations that
Right.
believed differently in
Right.
the way they do, like we do now,
Like we do now.
Baptists or Nazarene or Methodists might have today.
Very well said.
Very well different. So
Right.
what we see now is separated from that, and we've gotten all these different rules and regulations and followings and so forth that it even pulled us further and further away
Exactly.
from Judaism itself.
Exactly.
And I think that answers your question historically what has
Historically.
happened.
But what's been interesting, Alan, as you now bring it forward, and we talked about this before the show, was some unique chain of events took place. Well, after 70 AD, there was a dispersion of all the Jewish people from their Holy Land. Mm-hmm. And then in the mid-1900s, after World War II, there was a regathering. It began to regather. The nation of Israel was reestablished after World War II. And then through various circumstances and so forth, we have this nation and it's growing. But what's also interesting about that same time is there were some Jews, just back like what happened in the first century, that started coming back and recognizing, and this is really key, that Jesus as the Messiah that they've been searching for and looking for throughout the history. Mm-hmm. And so there's now, interesting as you picked it out, there's a bridge that's been built over the last 75 or so years, man, really longer than that, but it's really taken off since the mid-1900s. It's called the Messianic Judaism. Mm-hmm. And that movement has grown exponentially over the last 50 years. So that's what brought me and drew me in as a Christian, Gentile Christian. I've walked across that bridge, and that's where, as you mentioned earlier, where I started practicing a couple of the feasts that originated in my interest in studying Messianic Judaism.
Yeah. In fact, it's interesting because you're Messianic Jews, and all of them don't go by that same name, but we understand these are Jews that believe
in Jesus as
Messiah.
Yes.
Right. They still, as far as I know, they still practice the Sabbath.
Yes.
They still practice and they observe the feasts.
The feasts,
They
yes.
still observe the feasts, even though they are Jews, completed, because some of them will call them completed Jews.
Exactly. And what's also interesting, if you study the makeup of the Messianic Judaism religion today and those that are attending, there's may just well be as many Gentiles, if not more Gentiles, than there are Jews. So back to what you said earlier, there's been kind of not only a regathering of the Jewish chosen people in Israel, but also this growth of the blend that you talked about from the time of Jesus and what happened with Jews and Gentiles throughout the book of Acts and whatnot in the first century. It's happening again in the 21st century.
And it's amazing. I mean, we have people like Paul Wilbur. He's a musician.
Yes, absolutely.
And he's taken his music to Israel
Yes.
and has performed and has had crowds in the thousands
Yes.
who have come on Passover, and they've
Yes.
done concerts
Yes.
to Jews, Christian
Yes,
Jews.
absolutely.
We have today Jonathan Cahn. I consider him a prophet, who's also a Jew, rabbi, Christian.
Right.
And he speaks a lot about Old Testament prophecy, Old Testament teachings, and brings them into today,
Yes.
so we can understand the Old Testament.
Yeah, my most favorite Jew, I enjoy believing Jew that I enjoy following are two individuals. One is a gentleman named Boaz Michael. He's a founder of First Fruits of Zion. where I've spent a lot of time over the last 10 years studying Messianic Judaism through his teachings. And he and his team, I just feel like, tell it very straight. In fact, ironically enough, as we're talking about the feast today, his ministry is actually coming out with a study of the 7 feasts from a Messianic Jewish perspective here anytime now.
Yeah.
The other person I enjoy, and he writes incredible political thrillers, is Joel Rosenberg. And Joel Rosenberg, God has really placed a lot of favor upon him, and he relocated to Israel, but he's a Messianic Jew, but he views himself as a Christian, but he has written many thrillers, and he's almost a prophet in a sense that his thrillers kind of predict, in some ways, what may be happening, or what's happened over the last 25 years, politically speaking, across the world, especially between Israel and the world. But Joel, so those two individuals have had an impression upon me and some of my thinking.
Yeah. Well, the thing I like about Jonathan Cahn isn't as much as he's predicting, as much as he's calling for people to follow the truth.
Yes.
And that's what prophets basically did in the Old Testament. They called people to follow the truth. Yeah, and I think that's...
Well, I think with Jonathan Cahn, I had the privilege to read his book, The Harbinger, and that really, and that ties around the events of 20 years ago in New York City, 9/11, and how the symbolisms, and there's another young man, Perry Stone, who's a Gentile, but same kind of type of person that you described, who helps us understand the depths of the Old Testament and how things can be understood in our day and age today.
And he's written another book, Harbinger 2.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Just wanted to let you know
Yes.
that's out there. So when we talk about the feasts, I want everyone to understand what the feasts are. The feasts are, some of the feasts are basically commanded to recognize the things that God has done for them. There's commandments. There's also I don't know if it's edict, if you will. For example, the Feast of Purim. Okay, the Feast of Purim. It happens to be, if you read the book of Esther, is about the time when all these people were going to get rid of and annihilate the Jews. And in the book of Esther, it talks about how that they were able to get through this and how it was intervened. It doesn't talk about God, but it talks about how the one man, Mordecai, was able to reach out and into the king and able to find a way to preserve that. So what they've done is they have a Feast of Purim, which recognizes how God intervened and helped them, save them to go through. And all the feasts have this similar thing, the Feast of Passover. We basically, you have 3 major feasts. Correct me if I'm wrong.
You're right.
3 major feasts, and then we have 7 feasts that are what they call main feasts. Then you have a lot of smaller feasts, like I said, the Feast of Purim.
Purim is a smaller feast, along with Hanukkah. Right?
Hanukkah is another smaller one. Right.
And there's many others. You're exactly right. These 7 feasts were appointed by Jehovah. If you want to, in the book, during the time of Moses when they were in the wilderness, he established these feasts during that point in time, and you can read about them in the book of Leviticus, chapter 23. But the 3 that Alan was referring to that are what we call the main feasts are the pilgrimage feasts, and what that means is where all the Jewish people would go back to the temple or the temple during the times of David and Solomon. It was built and it was established, and then the new temple, the second temple built through Jesus' time, they'd have pilgrimages back to Jerusalem to make sacrifices and to follow and it was commandments established by our Father for the Jewish people to follow every year, and there are specific appointed times followed every year.
So the 3 main feasts are the Feast of Passover, the first one. Then you have the Feast of Weeks, which is also we would call the Feast of Pentecost.
In the Christian circles, yes.
Right. And then you also have the Feast of Tabernacles, which also people call the Feast of Tents or Booths.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
It's known as Sukkot.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. So in those 3 feasts, the Passover is in that March-April time frame, in the month of Nisan, and then Pentecost, which so happens we're in the middle of that week right now. Pentecost in our Jewish Judaism just celebrated over the last 2 days, and Christianity recognizes it this Sunday.
Yeah.
So Pentecost, which is Pente means 50, is 50 days after Passover. And there's a special, and that 50-day period in Judaism is called the period of Omer. It's a special time of barley, of harvest, and of worshiping. And it's 7 cycles of 7 that end on Pentecost. And then the fall feast you're referencing, Tabernacles, is a 7-day feast commemorating, and Pentecost commemorates the giving of the law from Judaism and the giving of the Holy Spirit in Christianity. And Tabernacles is really a celebration of provision. God in his presence as the Father and the Spirit in the first tabernacle during the wilderness, providing for his children.
Yeah, and actually, I believe that all the feasts have the same theme of that God has provided for them. Every single one of them.
Absolutely, and because think about what he's providing, not just our physical needs, but really our spiritual needs. Mm-hmm. His presence, his power, and who he is, his love for us, and as we know him as Christ Jesus, is about tabernacling with us. You know, Jesus, his name, when we sing about it during Christmas oftentimes, is Emmanuel, God mm-hmm. with us. So, and so as Jesus came and took on a form of a human being, he tabernacled in that body to share and reveal who God really is. That's what's really special.
So let's see if we have time. We can go through the feasts.
Sure.
And we'll start with Passover because that's most well known.
Yes.
At least to us who are Christians. And the Feast of Passover, most people that I know believe that all Passover is when the Holy Spirit or God, the Spirit of God came over Egypt, and if you had the blood on the doorpost, then your child, the oldest one, or whatever, wouldn't die, and you would go over, and that's Passover. However, that is just the end of the story, right? I mean, they have all these requirements that they had to do to get to the blood.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely, and but you're right, Alan. The first Passover took place during the Exodus, after the 430 years of slavery. The 10th plague, right? Because Pharaoh, those 10 plagues, and I'll tie it back to what you were talking about, the steps of Passover, or what we know as a Seder and so forth. But ultimately, it's the blood atonement. God requires blood atonement. Unblemished blood to be, to cleanse us of our sins. That was established during this period of time, not only with the commandments, but I'll go even back further than that, Abraham and Isaac, mm-hmm. right? So, having said that, yes, that first Passover, the angel of the Lord came, executed the judgment that the Father established, but then ultimately, in the wilderness, he established as an appointed time to remember that event, but then to also speak deeper into the importance of sacrificing the lamb, what it means, and having a celebration around that.
Right. So the steps that I know of, okay, so they had to find a lamb without blemish.
Yes.
They had to kill the lamb, and they had to roast the lamb.
Yes.
They couldn't boil the lamb, right? They had to
Right.
roast the lamb.
Right.
Okay, they had to eat the lamb.
Right.
And they had to eat it while they were dressed and ready to go. They had to have their shoes on their feet,
Yes.
their clothes on, their
Yes.
staff in hand. They had to be dressed,
Right.
ready to leave
Right.
while they ate the lamb.
Yes.
Is all correct?
Right, and that first Passover, that's exactly what took place in a sense. And then the event took place, and then Pharaoh released the people, and they were on their way. Not, at that point, while it may not be crystal clear how they celebrated their faith prior to that moment, the way we understand it and what's revealed in Scripture is they, as Alan said, in haste had to leave Egypt, and that ties also to the second feast, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And talks about that. And so one aspect, Alan, I'll share with you, what Passover and unleavened bread and first fruits, which is the third feast, have become is really a 7 or 8 day period that takes place, coincides with Easter and the resurrection that we celebrate, and Good Friday and resurrection that we celebrate as Christianity, and we can talk more about that if you wish. But there's a meal that's really important that I want to, hopefully we can dive into a little bit, called the Seder. Mm-hmm. And that Seder was revealed, and the Gospels talk about it. Specifically, we refer to it as the Last Supper of Christ, and we can dive into that if you wish.
And from what I understand, the Last Supper, as we call it, was actually the meal of Seder.
Exactly, and it was happening on the eve of Passover.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what's really interesting, and you brought up the other two. Let me finish up with the Passover. So the Passover, as we know, as we celebrate the Passover, is to recognize God's provision.
Yes.
Okay, to deliver the people from bondage from Egypt.
Right.
Basically, and save them from that.
And then that's exactly how it was established.
Yeah,
Definitely.
What's interesting is in my, I'm not all up on all the feasts like you are, so I had to do a lot of research this last couple of weeks.
Sounds like you've done some great research, Alan.
Well, what's hard is you have these different ideas, and so I have to really weed out what isn't accurate to what is put in there, and then you got a lot of people who want to equate the new and the old. It's like, no, it doesn't do that, and so it was, sometimes it's not easy.
But it isn't, and then there's the traditions, right?
Yeah.
You know, I've touched on a little bit, and I appreciate that. But something, as you were sharing that last comment, I always do this too, and we learn this as believers, is to test the truth.
Yeah.
And how do we do that? By taking it back to Scripture. So I think discerning, and I'm as Alan is too, and that's what I appreciate about his show and who he is and his character. And as I've known Alan over the years, is he's very faithful to the revealed Word. That is so important.
Well, thank you. I work on it.
No, it's not easy because we got to filter our own thoughts and minds. But there you go.
So the next two feasts, and I'm going to put these together.
Please
and
do
the
that.
reason I'm going to put these together is because, and there's the Feast of Unleavened Bread. You've brought that up.
Yes.
And the Feast of First Fruits, which you also brought up.
Yes.
Okay. Now the Feast of Unleavened. Go ahead and tell us what those are.
Well, the unleavened bread relates to this idea of leaven versus unleavened. And
Okay.
it ties back to, and the reason I brought it up, it ties back to that first Passover, that they broke bread as part of their meal, but unfortunately, leavened bread, they didn't have time for it to leaven or to grow, so they ate it in haste, and it didn't finish the process. Now that's become part of the traditional Seder. It's called matzah. So there's this period of, and it's also a period where it kicks off the harvest season. So it's recognizing, again, all back to this idea of giving your first of something to God. The unleavened bread feast and the first fruits feast ties into that concept.
So what I understand of the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, it has to do with 30 days after the Passover of eating unleavened bread until the manna came. And they had those 30 days that the bread didn't rise.
Didn't rise, right.
So that's why you have unleavened bread, and
Very
that's why you have the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Yes.
That's what I've read and understood.
Well, as I describe it as my understanding, I'm not going to disagree with that.
Okay.
That makes a lot of sense to me. So it does tie in to that first that journey, because remember that first 30 days, there's a period of time where they went through the Red Sea and then made it to the on the other side. And that's
They probably didn't have time to cook their bread.
Exactly right. They were working off all the reserves and all the grain and everything else that was in the distilleries that they were allowed to take. Very, very well said, Alan.
So, and the next one is the Feast of the First Fruits.
Yes.
Which has to do with, I believe it's the grain.
Yes.
It's the harvest of the grain.
Yes.
The first fruits of that. So
Yes.
talk about that.
Well, again, same kind of concept. It's the idea of setting aside some of what you create or what you produce for the family, for others, and it's similar to what God calls us to do, and call all people to set aside a tithe. So it's the idea of providing for everyone and sharing that provision, because there may be times where you're not in a position to be able to meet your needs. Well, the first fruits helps provide for that and for the whole family of God, not just your individual family.
Right. And I don't know if this is, I read this, I don't know if this is more of a modern thinking or if this was the thinking from mid time frame or from the very beginning, and I wrote it down, that the idea is in the Jew thinking was that God, they thank God for the first fruits, which gave God a reason to bless the whole season to the last of the harvest. I don't know if this is original thinking or if this is kind of filtered through.
More true. That certainly rings with my mindset on the importance of giving.
Yeah.
And so I think I would say, I don't recall reading that specific idea in Scripture, I think it's
Yeah.
it makes sense to me. That's what the motivation behind it.
Yeah, and sometimes, if you get into the Talmud, which that's what I do.
Yes.
You get in there, you read things from different writers and
Right.
rabbis that put things in. Of course, this is more toward the era of Daniel.
Okay.
So I don't. That's why I said I don't know if it's
Yes.
during that period or afterwards,
Right.
because the modern Judaism, they put things in there. It was just really funny. I was told a story. If we have time here, I was told a story by Lon Ekdahl.
Yes.
He had a guy live next door to him. His name was Alan, and he was Jewish.
Okay.
And he always dressed like a T-shirt and cutoffs.
Yes.
And one day, Lon saw him in a suit. He says, "Oh, you're dressed up." He says, "Oh yeah, we just had Passover dinner." "Oh, so tell me what is Passover?" Lon not knowing what's
Yes.
he goes, "Well, I don't know. We just have it and I just eat it." Didn't know at all. And Lon goes, "Really? Well, come on in. Let me tell you about it." So we
Yes.
told him all about the Passover, and all about the lamb and this and that. And he laughed. He goes, "Oh, well, we just had chicken."
Well, shh. That's happened on a couple of my Passover Seders too, actually, Alan. So do what you got to do sometimes.
So Lon makes the joke of, "Oh, they had sacrificial chicken."
I think the important thing, and we can say this too. We find that same kind of mindset also on the Gentile side when it comes time to Christmas and Easter too.
Yeah.
But I think what's important is what your friend did. Instead of, oh, but come on in and let me share with you a little bit more on how I celebrate Passover, and that built a bridge that allowed each to sharpen their saw a little bit
Yeah.
and grow in their relationships. So that's what we try to do.
Well, I recommend anybody who hears this that they watch this show at the end of June when he comes on our show. He's incredible. Anyway, why I wanted to put these other two feasts right along with Passover
Yes.
is because these three feasts happen in the same week. Isn't that correct?
That's exactly right. Within an 8-day period.
I think that's weird.
It is, and what's even more cool, while that's how it's celebrated, when you look at when you overlay it over on the life of Christ in his last week of his life, he celebrated the Last Supper, which coincided with the Passover Seder, traditional Passover Seder meal, the eve of Passover. He was crucified and breathed his last breath at the exact moment that the lamb was slaughtered for the temple at 3, and then he was resurrected on the first fruit Sunday. As we know, Sunday, but that third day.
Yeah.
So I think so it's just really interesting. So yeah, it's and you'll find that same thing as Alan talked about with the fall feast that we'll talk about in a few minutes too. How these feasts are all put together in a short period of time.
Oh, yeah, and that's why I think they're all remarkable.
Absolutely.
So the next feast we call the Feast of Trumpets. However, it's also Yom Kippur, correct?
Well, there's Pentecost that we've already talked about, which is the feast that takes place in that May.
I skipped that.
Nah, that's okay. That's okay.
Let's go back. Yeah, I skipped
we
that.
have to go back, and then we'll come back. Yes.
Feast of Pentecost. I apologize. Feast of Weeks. Pentecost.
The Feast of Weeks in the Scripture. Judaism knows it as the Feast of Shavuot, and then
Okay.
the Christians know it as Pentecost.
Right.
So, from the Jewish perspective, it again established during the time of Noah, and if you study the Exodus and study the flow of time after they arrived at Sinai, then Moses went up for a period of 40 days to receive the commandments, and then when he came down the mountain, and he had the commandments, he gave the commandments, and obviously they were doing the golden calf thing. But long story short, that's viewed as the giving of the commandments as the 50th day after Passover. Okay, so that's where we get the Pentecost name from down the road. But moving forward, from a Jewish perspective, they recognize the Feast of Weeks as the Feast of Giving the Law.
Yeah. So the Feast of Weeks, or Pentecost,
Yes.
which is 50 days from Passover.
Right.
And that's when you have, and which actually has to do with the harvest as well.
Exactly. It's all tied into the celebration of the harvest and giving back at that point in time.
And this is at the end of harvest.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
So we have the beginning of harvest, first fruits, then we have the end of harvest, which is
Weeks.
Weeks.
And again, it's interesting you guys say, why weeks? Where did that name come from? Well, again, back to the cycles of God, it was a series of 7 weeks that took place between Passover and the 50th day.
Okay.
Good deal.
All right. Well, now let's get back to the feast, Yom Kippur, or
Yes.
the Feast of Trumpets.
Right. The Feast of Trumpets is called, from a Jewish perspective, Rosh Hashanah.
Right.
And that's the first day of the Jewish New Year on their calendar. And so that's a time of celebration and new beginnings and restart. And then there's a 10-day period from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, which is a high holy holiday in Judaism, where or as we know it, is the Day of Atonement.
Right.
And then that leads to an 8-day Feast of Tabernacles, which is the third fall feast.
And this is probably, as I understand, one of the most important feasts, holidays, days of the Jews.
It is. Atonement is, because if you study the process, that's where everybody, between that, in that 10-day period, you have the opportunity to make right, to have your sins cleansed, because you want your name kept in the book of life.
Right.
And so the atonement is the overall corporate aspect of that. You've made right during that 10-day period from Rosh Hashanah to Kippur. Then you go through the services to make yourself right. And of course, at that point, it also ties into, that's the one time of the year that the high priest atoned for the whole nation of Israel, and was allowed by our Father to go into the Holy of Holies inside the temple.
Right.
To make atonement.
Right.
With the blood of the sacrifice, and there's many sacrifices that took place.
So it's referred to as a time of repentance.
Yes.
And also a time of regathering.
Absolutely. Exactly. Which is that celebration of that acceptance of the sacrifices, the regathering, the tabernacles.
Yeah.
A time of being with family, and again, it's a very special time for not just our Jewish brothers and sisters, but for all of us.
Well, yeah, and I'm going to insert here, because I don't think we can divide it like we were going to.
Right.
But what's important about the Day of Atonement is we talk about the sacrificial lamb.
Yes.
So in our understanding is as Jesus came as a suffering servant.
Yes.
Okay, because I'm going to divide, because a lot of people think it's the Messiah, but Jesus came twice. He's coming twice. That's why we call it second coming. He came as a suffering servant. And the suffering servant, Jesus, became the sacrificial lamb.
Right.
For all mankind, for all of time.
So, and therefore, as a result of that sacrifice, there's no need for the sacrificial system that was established in the Old Testament by Father, that Jesus became that lamb. And so there was no more need.
However, we need to partake of the lamb.
Yes.
In order to have our sins atoned for.
Absolutely.
Because I know there's people out there who think because Jesus came, he's the Savior of the world. Oh, I believe that, so that's good enough for me, and I'm good to go to heaven. And that's not true.
That's not true. I mean, well, as we talk about, as revealed by our first apostles, salvation is by grace and faith in Jesus Christ and what he did in his death, burial, and resurrection for ourselves.
Yeah. And faith has that, it's an active verb. It has a lot to do with obedience.
Exactly. I agree. And Alan, I agree with that. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think and that's probably a topic for another time, but obedience. And look, if you follow the life of Christ, you see, and the opportunity where he could have called down legions of angels to rescue him or to save him, both in the front end of his ministry and at the end of his ministry. But he always said, "Thy will be done."
And so the Day of Atonement, as we call it, is usually around September, October.
Right.
Now, for those of you who don't know, the Jewish calendar or Hebrew calendar is not the same as our 12-month calendar.
No, it's not.
We have differences. This is why we have a problem with when Jesus was born. We have 0.
Right.
And he wasn't born in zero. He was
zero.
born most likely 4 BC.
Exactly.
Because they don't go back to the Hebrew calendar. It was all done because of somebody doing something they didn't figure out.
Exactly.
And so it was on a Gregorian calendar.
Yes, first of the Julian.
Yeah.
Yes.
So basically, it's back to history.
Yeah, I love it. That's why I love it. I enjoy talking with you so much, because you always learn. That's why he's the right man to moderate the believer's journey.
So Day of Atonement, it's really important, not only for the idea of the Jew, and the other thing, too, I thought you brought up is you want to make sure your name is in the book of life.
Right.
Well, most Christians think that's a New Testament thing.
They do. but it's not.
I know.
Isn't that incredible?
I
to
know.
think about? I mean, it's always been there from before, in the beginning. You know, the whole concept of being with our Creator for eternity.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading at the Day of Atonement when they came and they had brought the sacrifice, which I understood when I didn't understand this before, but the lamb is always killed outside the walls.
Yes. Yes.
That's something I learned during all of this 2 weeks. That
Yes.
always outside the walls.
That's interesting. That's
which brought in the idea of Jesus being taken outside the walls
at Golgotha,
to be crucified. Yeah.
Yes.
Because some of these people think that he was crucified there inside the walls.
No.
You know, and it's like, no, it's outside.
Absolutely.
And I already knew that.
You did.
But
to see the connection.
Exactly.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that I think if your listeners take one thing away, is that the feasts demonstrate Messiah. The Messiah, the feast, you know, it's a foreshadowing. It's a fulfillment. It's a personification of who God is, and what Jesus did for us many years ago.
Yeah. So then we have the Feast of Tabernacles, which
Yes.
you talked about a little bit. So why don't you continue with that and let us know more?
Well, again, that is the one of the three main feasts we talked about. That's the fall feast. That's the one to take place. And you'll see, if you go back and study the life of Christ, you'll see that he followed. There were aspects of his ministry that took place during these fall feasts. But the Tabernacles is typically a 7-day feast, again, where it's a time of celebration after the atonement, after the sacrifice being made. Now we come together, and again, the concept of Tabernacles is God is with us, and the Jewish people would then leave their homes, build temporary shelters, and again, there was palm branches. That ties back to the palm branch thing of the last week of Christ's life. But the bottom line is, it's a time of, you know, where they would it was temporary shelters, mirroring the provision and the care of God in the wilderness. So it's a celebration of that.
And it also was a memorial for in the booths
Yes.
for those during the 40 years that
Yes.
they wandered in the
Yes.
wilderness.
Right, exactly.
So it has a lot to do with that as well.
Absolutely. So again, you see all these feasts tie back to that first generation of Moses and his generation and the things that the Lord established. But again, he had foreknowledge to see it. It also tied into his chosen son, who would then ultimately.
Yeah.
And then we talked about it. You know, again, the fulfillment of those spring feasts of Passover, first fruits, and unleavened bread, tying to Christ's first coming. And there's belief that the fall feast, there'll be a Christ connection fulfillment related to his return.
Yeah. And, because I think that, I mean, I really like the way I see this in perspective of that God has done these things for his people.
Yes.
He's provided, he's given of himself, he
Yes.
has delivered them.
Yes.
And what is done now is the Jews take this and they remember it.
Absolutely.
Through their feasts. And they party. It looks like
Absolutely.
they have
And when you think about it, and what's so cool is as we've talked about it from primarily a Jewish perspective today, from a Christian perspective, we have Easter, we have Christmas, and Easter ties to those spring feasts, and then one of the lesser feasts that we haven't talked about, Hanukkah, which is the Festival of Lights, tying to another victory and God's miracle provision in the temple prior to the life of Christ. But that's celebrated in December typically, and that ties into, you know, when we as Christians we celebrate and celebrate Christmas. And then I even like to go one step further, Alan, and say Thanksgiving. I think we can probably add Thanksgiving in there in some way, shape, or form too, is that even though I'd say not a Christian recognized event. It's the idea of Thanksgiving and sharing food and breaking bread and being together in family. I see a lot of similarity to that holiday that we celebrate typically in the Western world to the Tabernacles and Tabernacles feast of the Bible.
And I agree to a point there. I think that Thanksgiving is similar probably to what you have in your first fruits and and your weeks and so
Right,
forth,
right.
because you're thanking God for
Absolutely.
His provision.
Exactly.
You know, it's interesting, and we're going. My wife and I are going to Moldova for the month of November, so we'll be gone the whole month. And so I was just talking to one of the missionaries that are over there, and I mentioned that we're going to be there that long. Oh, and so we're not going to be having Thanksgiving here. So we're going to have it. And I know you guys don't celebrate it. We're going to have it there at your home. And so, oh yeah, we don't celebrate that. He says, I know. So we're going to have it there.
Yes.
I don't know if you guys have turkeys though. So
Well, maybe like the chicken and lamb thing again. You'll go with what they.
well, there you go. Yeah.
There you go.
But he said, and he happened to say his mother's raising turkeys. Oh, we can take one of hers.
Yeah, right. Please.
So, but you know what's interesting in looking at Christian perspective of things, like in the Passover, you know, having Jesus as our lamb, our sacrificial lamb,
Yes.
you know, helps, identifies with the Passover.
Absolutely.
What's really interesting is that when I looked at the Christian perspective of the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the First Fruits, I couldn't find an equivalent.
Well, it's not within. I agree with you. Not from a religious theological perspective, but I think when you dig a little deeper with the body of Christ and what happened at the Last Supper, He gave us the new covenant, and the idea of communion. Then I think the idea of communion helps to tie in those other two spring feasts into the equation.
I think the idea of what we see as communion, other than remembering Him, His body, and His blood, probably were part of this regular meal, though, right?
Well, that's a good question. Yes, they did eat bread, but then He turned that into, you know, and it was unleavened bread. It gets kind of cool. It was unleavened bread that He broke, right? That was part of the Seder at that point.
Would
in
have
time.
to be, yes.
And what's cool about the unleavened bread today, in the Seder, there's three pieces. It's called there's three pieces to that bread. Interesting that the Trinity kind of showing up a little bit, but the matzah, it's known as matzah. It's striped unleavened bread.
Oh.
So that makes it a little more deeper. And then of course the middle bread is the one they hide, and then it's revealed. Well, there is the mystery of the Messiah being revealed on the cross of Calvary.
Yeah.
So it's really, I mean, and then Jesus referenced one last comment, you know, about the wine. When he drank the wine, that was part of the Seder, and that's when He made that, you know, this is the blood that I'm sacrificing for you. And of course, the disciples at the time didn't understand what He was talking about at that point.
Yeah.
And we understand that later. But He said, I won't drink of the fourth cup until we all come back together again. And that is the fourth cup of praise, our sanctification. That's part of the Seder celebrated today.
So which feast do you...
Yes. I primarily celebrate the Passover feast with a Seder, and then in addition, I also celebrate Hanukkah. So those are the two. And then my family, I walk them through the fall feasts, but we don't follow the traditional Messianic Jewish way of doing that.
So do you put blue lights on your house?
Absolutely.
Do you really?
Yes, I do.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
I even put a menorah out in front to go along with my lights, and I again, like I said, I actively celebrate Hanukkah along with it.
That's cool. So
Yes.
actually, your Christmas time is really long.
It is long, and it goes all the way to the day of Epiphany. So 12 days of Christmas,
Yeah.
the 12th day after Christmas.
Well, that's cool.
So I enjoy it. I love celebrations. So thank you, Alan,
Yeah.
for the privilege to come on your show today.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm not sure what time it is. We don't have a clock. So, so actually, we have a couple more minutes.
Yes.
And is there anything else you want to share with the importance of why maybe we should recognize as a world of believers in Jesus, why we should honor or consider looking at following any of the...
Well, you know, I think for me, what I'd like to share is my mother introduced me to a couple of the feasts at Hanukkah when we were children, and as I became an adult, the Lord guided me back to Him, and I think I've seen my relationship with Christ, my understanding of who He is and what He believes and what He represents, grow as a result of beginning to embrace who He is, because we seem to forget he was a faithful, and you mentioned it early on in our show, faithful Jewish brother and rabbi of the Old Testament, of the Torah, and he never broke the law. So he's Jewish, and so I was interested in that. I wanted to understand more about who he is and who he was, and so that really took my understanding of God and my relationship with God to another level. That's why I embrace it so much.
Good. Well, I definitely want to get with you sometime because I want to know and follow some steps that you probably are a lot easier for me to figure out than going through books and reading on it.
Well, and I will tell you, I would encourage everybody to start with the Passover and just take it some time to understand what it represents. It'll pique your interest, and then when you do that, and then find a local synagogue. Either it could be a Messianic synagogue or a non-Messianic synagogue. In my case, it was a non-Messianic synagogue first time, and just embrace your Jewish friends, and they'll be more than glad to share that experience with you, and you'll start to see what we've been talking about for the last hour.
Well, that's easy for me. I have some Jewish friends that I really love dearly. So.
Absolutely. So thank you for your interest, Alan, and for inviting me to talk about it today.
Well, I really appreciate you coming.
Yes.
It's been really enlightening, and I hope that our audience really sees this, and I think reads about it.
I hope so.
Look up in Leviticus chapter 23.
Yes.
Read that chapter because it talks about the feasts.
It does.
And actually the feasts are listed other places.
They are.
But
Yes.
that is a good place. And I thank you for joining us today. I hope you have a wonderful week. And
Thank you.
love to everybody. Aloha.